Behind the sparkling magic and suburban charm of television's most beloved witch lay a world of bizarre coincidences, tragic accidents, and supernatural theories that would make even Samantha's spells seem tame. From a cursed cast that seemed destined for early deaths, to a pilot that began filming on the same day JFK was assassinated, the real magic happened when the cameras stopped rolling, and it wasn't always the good kind. Fact 1. Pilot filming started on JFK's assassination day. The very first day of rehearsals for Bewitched began on November 22, 1963, which happened to be the exact same day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. This shocking coincidence wasn't just a random twist of fate for the cast and crew, because the tragedy hit particularly close to home for the show's producer and director, William Asher, who had a personal connection to the president that made the day even more devastating. Just over a year earlier, Asher had produced one of the most famous birthday celebrations in American history when he organized President Kennedy's birthday party at Madison Square Garden in May of 1962. This was the legendary event where Marilyn Monroe took the stage in her famous skin-tight, crystal-covered dress and sang her sultry version of Happy Birthday, Mr. President, in front of 15,000 people. The performance became one of the most iconic moments of both Monroe's career and Kennedy's presidency. And Asher was the man behind the cameras making it all happen. So when news of the assassination reached the Bewitched soundstage that Friday afternoon, it wasn't just another tragic news story for Asher and his wife, Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha. They had actually known Kennedy personally and considered him a friend. The entire cast and crew were devastated by the news, and production was immediately halted as everyone tried to process what had happened to the country and to someone they had worked with so recently. Despite the overwhelming grief and shock, the show eventually had to go on. The pilot episode, titled I Darren, Take This Witch, Samantha, was completed on December 6, 1963, just 2 weeks after the assassination. The timing created an eerie connection between the birth of America's most famous TV witch and one of the darkest days in American history. Fact 2. The famous nose twitch was fake. The most iconic gesture in television history, Samantha's magical nose twitch that could clean a house or turn someone into a toad, wasn't actually created by Elizabeth Montgomery wiggling her nose at all. What millions of viewers thought they were seeing was completely different from what was actually happening on set, because Montgomery was actually moving her lips back and forth in a subtle motion to create the illusion that her nose was twitching. This technique worked so well that, even today, most people assume Montgomery had some natural ability to wiggle her nose in that distinctive way. The truth is that very few people can actually move their nose muscles independently without moving other parts of their face, so the show's creators had to get creative with how they would bring Samantha's signature spellcasting gesture to life on screen. Montgomery's husband and the show's producer, William Asher, later revealed that his wife would naturally do this lip movement when she was frustrated or annoyed in real life, which gave him the idea to use it as Samantha's magical gesture. But the simple lip movement alone wasn't enough to create the full effect that viewers saw on their television screens. The production team enhanced Montgomery's subtle facial movements with various camera tricks and editing techniques to make the nose twitch appear more pronounced and magical. They would sometimes use close-up shots at specific angles that made the movement look more dramatic, and they added special sound effects to accompany the gesture that helped sell the illusion to audiences. What made this deception even more convincing was Montgomery's natural acting ability and timing. She had perfected the movement so well that it looked completely effortless and natural, as if she really was just casually twitching her nose to cast spells. The combination of her subtle lip movements, the camera work, and the magical sound effects created one of the most recognizable gestures in television history, even though it was built on a complete illusion. Fact 3. Aunt Clara's doorknob obsession was real. One of the most beloved characters on Bewitched was Aunt Clara, the sweet but bumbling elderly witch who could never quite get her spells right and had a peculiar fascination with doorknobs that seemed completely random to viewers. What fans never knew was that this strange character trait wasn't invented by the show's writers at all, but was actually based on the real-life hobby of Marion Lorne, the actress who brought Aunt Clara to life with such charm and authenticity. Marion Lorne was genuinely obsessed with doorknobs in her personal life and had spent years building an impressive collection that eventually grew to include more than 1,000 different antique doorknobs from all over the world. She wasn't just casually interested in them either, but was a true connoisseur who could identify different styles, periods, and craftsmanship techniques just by looking at the intricate details of each piece. When the show's writers and producers learned about Lorne's unusual collecting passion, they decided it was too perfect not to incorporate into her character. They wrote Aunt Clara's doorknob obsession directly into the scripts, which meant that whenever viewers saw the character getting distracted by or commenting on doorknobs, they were essentially watching Marion Lorne's real personality shine through her fictional witch persona. This connection between the actress and her character made Aunt Clara's doorknob moments feel completely natural and genuine, because Lorne didn't have to pretend to be fascinated by them. She could draw on her actual knowledge and enthusiasm for these objects, which gave her performance an authentic quality that viewers could sense even if they didn't understand why. The fact that such a specific and unusual hobby became a defining character trait for one of television's most memorable witches shows how real-life quirks can sometimes make their way into fictional characters in the most unexpected ways, creating moments that feel both bizarre and perfectly believable at the same time. Fact 4. The house was actually from Gidget. The charming suburban home where Samantha and Darren Stevens lived at 1164 Morning Glory Circle wasn't actually designed for Bewitched at all, but was originally created for a completely different project 5 years earlier. The house that became one of the most recognizable homes in television history started its life as the exterior location for the 1959 Columbia Pictures film Gidget, which was filmed at a real house located at 267 18th Street in Santa Monica, California. When Columbia Pictures needed to create a permanent set for Bewitched in 1964, they took the architectural blueprints from that original Gidget house and did something quite clever with them. Instead of building an exact replica, they reversed the entire design like a mirror image and constructed this flipped version as a facade attached to an existing garage on Columbia's ranch backlot in Burbank. This gave them a familiar-looking house that was legally distinct from the original Santa Monica property. The recycling didn't stop there, because Columbia Pictures also reused the interior patio and living room sets that had been created for the 1963 film Gidget Goes to Rome and adapted them to become the permanent indoor sets for the Bewitched soundstage. This meant that both the exterior and interior of the Stevens home had previous lives in other productions before Samantha ever twitched her nose there. What made this house even more interesting was how frequently it appeared in other shows and movies throughout the 1960s and 70s. The same exterior was used as Dr. Bellows' house in I Dream of Jeannie, appeared in episodes of the Monkees television series, and showed up in the Jerry Lewis film Hook, Line, and Sinker. The house became such a versatile piece of television real estate that it essentially served as a neighborhood anchor for Columbia's backlot, appearing in dozens of different productions over the years. Fact 5. Elizabeth Montgomery had 3 real pregnancies. Elizabeth Montgomery was pregnant 3 different times during the 8 years that Bewitched was in production, which created some interesting challenges for the show's writers and costume designers, who had to figure out how to handle her changing appearance while keeping the show's continuity intact. The way they dealt with each pregnancy was completely different, showing how television production adapted to real-life situations in the 1960s. Her first pregnancy occurred during the show's first season in 1964, and the production team decided to keep this pregnancy completely hidden from viewers. The costume department worked overtime to design progressively looser and baggier clothing that would disguise Montgomery's expanding waistline, using flowing dresses, oversized coats, and strategic camera angles to keep her condition secret. They were so successful at hiding this pregnancy that most viewers never noticed anything different about Samantha's appearance during those episodes. However, when Montgomery became pregnant for the second and third times, the show's creators took a completely different approach and decided to write her pregnancies directly into the storyline. Her second pregnancy became the basis for introducing Tabitha Stevens, Samantha, and Darren's daughter, who would become a major character on the show and even get her own spin-off series years later. Her third pregnancy was similarly incorporated into the scripts to create Adam Stevens, the couple's son who was initially thought to be a normal mortal child but was later revealed to have magical powers of his own. Montgomery herself was quite happy with this decision to include her real-life experiences in the show's fictional world. In a 1967 interview, she said she loved the old-fashioned approach of having Samantha be a devoted mother, alongside being a witch, because it added an extra layer of complexity to her character's already challenging situation of balancing her magical heritage with her suburban housewife role. Fact 6. Dick York's back injury created Darren, too. The reason Bewitched had two different actors playing Darren Stevens wasn't a creative decision by the show's producers, but was actually the tragic result of a serious back injury that Dick York had suffered years before the show even began. In 1959, while filming the movie They Came to Cordura, York was performing a scene where he had to lift another actor who was supposed to be unconscious, but the other actor wasn't prepared, and York ended up lifting his full body weight unexpectedly. This accident tore most of the muscles on the right side of York's back and damaged his spine so severely that it never healed properly, leaving him in constant pain for the rest of his life. The medical treatments available in the 1950s and 60s couldn't repair this type of injury, so doctors could only prescribe increasingly strong pain medications to help him manage the chronic agony he experienced every single day. York was incredibly dedicated to his craft and managed to continue working despite his condition, but the physical demands of television production made his situation progressively worse. During the first 4 seasons of Bewitched, he often had to be filmed lying down or sitting, because standing for long periods became too painful, and many episodes were written to accommodate his physical limitations by having Darren spend scenes in bed or on the couch. The situation reached a breaking point in January of 1969, while filming an episode called Daddy Does His Thing. York was working on a scaffold 15 feet in the air alongside actor Maurice Evans, when the combination of hot studio lights, exhaustion, and his pain medications caused him to have a seizure and collapse. He was immediately rushed to the hospital, and after a long conversation with producer William Asher, York made the difficult decision to leave the show permanently. Dick Sargent was quickly hired to replace him, creating one of television's most famous casting changes. Fact 7. The show's magic required exhausting manual labor. What looked like effortless magic on television was actually the result of incredibly hard physical work by dozens of crew members who had to perform precisely choreographed movements in perfect timing to create Samantha's spells. In the 1960s, there were no computer-generated effects or digital magic, so every single magical moment on Bewitched required a team of stagehands to manually move objects, furniture, and props while the cameras were rolling. The most common magical effect on the show was Samantha using her powers to instantly clean a messy room, which meant Elizabeth Montgomery had to raise her arms in the air and hold them there motionless, while the director called "cut" and a crew of stagehands rushed onto the set. These crew members would then frantically remove newspapers, laundry, toys, and other clutter from the living room, rearrange furniture to look neat and tidy, and make sure everything was positioned exactly right before the director called "action again" and Montgomery could lower her arms to complete the magical transformation. This process was much more physically demanding for Montgomery than viewers ever realized, because holding her arms up in the air for several minutes at a time while the crew worked around her caused severe muscle strain and pain. The production team eventually had to provide her with a special setup that included crutches so she could rest her arms between takes and give her muscles a break from the constant strain. Other magical effects required even more complex coordination, including the use of invisible wires for levitation scenes, fast motion and backward motion film techniques to make objects appear and disappear, and carefully timed pyrotechnics for characters like Dr. Bombay who would pop in and out of scenes. When actors needed to change costumes during magical transformations, they had to keep their feet positioned in exactly the same spot marked on the floor so they would appear in the right place when the cameras started rolling again. Fact 8. Agnes Moorehead's real diamond brooch. One of the most elegant and expensive pieces of jewelry ever worn on a television sitcom wasn't a costume department prop at all, but was actually Agnes Moorehead's personal starburst brooch that she regularly wore while playing the imperious witch Endora throughout the series. This stunning piece of jewelry was set with 8.5 carats of genuine old mine diamonds, making it worth an enormous amount of money and far more valuable than anything the show's costume budget could have afforded. Moorehead, who was already an established and respected actress before joining Bewitched, owned this exquisite brooch as part of her personal collection and decided to incorporate it into Endora's wardrobe because she felt it perfectly matched her character's regal and sophisticated personality. The brooch became such a signature part of Endora's look that viewers began to associate it with the character, even though they had no idea they were looking at real diamonds worth thousands of dollars every time it appeared on screen. Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Moorehead's on-screen daughter Samantha, had always admired the beautiful brooch and would often compliment Moorehead on how stunning it looked during filming. The two actresses developed a close friendship over the years they worked together. Despite the fact that their characters had such a contentious relationship on the show, with Endora constantly disapproving of Samantha's marriage to the mortal Darren. When Agnes Moorehead passed away in 1974, just 2 years after Bewitched ended its run, she remembered her television daughter's admiration for the brooch and made sure it would go to someone who truly appreciated it. In her will, Moorehead bequeathed the precious starburst brooch to Elizabeth Montgomery, creating a lasting connection between the two actresses that went far beyond their fictional mother-daughter relationship and showed the genuine affection they had developed for each other during their time working together. Fact 9. The theme song has hidden lyrics. The instantly recognizable Bewitched theme song that played over the opening credits for 8 seasons was always heard as a purely instrumental piece. But what most fans never knew was that a complete vocal version of the song actually exists with full lyrics that were recorded but never used on the show. This secret version was performed by Steve Lawrence, a popular singer and entertainer who was well known in the 1960s for his smooth vocal style and frequent appearances on variety shows. Lawrence recorded his version of the Bewitched theme in a swinging, jazz-influenced style that slowed down the zippy, upbeat tempo that television audiences were familiar with hearing during the opening credits. His vocal interpretation gave the familiar melody a completely different feel, transforming it from the playful, magical tune viewers knew into something more romantic and sophisticated that sounded like it could have been played in a nightclub or on a late-night radio show. The lyrics that Lawrence sang captured the essence of the show's premise about a witch using her magical powers to enchant both her husband and the audience. The words tied directly into the show's central theme of Samantha's supernatural abilities and how they affected everyone around her, particularly her mortal husband Darren, who was constantly dealing with the consequences of being married to someone with magical powers. Even though this vocal version was professionally recorded and sounded polished enough to be used on the show, the producers ultimately decided to stick with the instrumental version for the opening credits. The decision to keep the theme song without vocals allowed the magical sound effects and visual elements of the opening sequence to take center stage, while the upbeat instrumental melody perfectly matched the playful tone that the show wanted to establish right from the beginning of each episode. Fact 10. A fire destroyed the original set. In the middle of 1970, disaster struck the Bewitched production when a fire completely destroyed the interior sets of the Stevens family home, creating a major crisis for the show's producers, who suddenly had no place to film the majority of their scenes. This unexpected catastrophe happened during the show's 6th season and could have easily ended the series entirely, since rebuilding elaborate television sets was an expensive and time-consuming process that many shows couldn't afford to undertake. Rather than shut down production and wait for new sets to be constructed, the creative team came up with an innovative solution that would take the cast and crew on an unprecedented adventure. In June of 1970, the entire Bewitched production relocated from their Hollywood sound stages to the historic town of Salem, Massachusetts, along with the nearby communities of Magnolia and Gloucester, to film what would become known as the Salem Saga episodes. This location shoot was remarkable because it marked the first and only time in the show's 8-year run that filming took place anywhere other than the controlled environment of Columbia's studios and backlot in California. The cast and crew spent weeks on the East Coast creating an 8-part story arc that centered around Samantha, Darren, and Endora traveling to Salem for a special Centennial Witches convention, which provided the perfect storyline excuse for why the characters would be away from their familiar suburban home. When the production team finally returned to California and rebuilt the Stevens house sets, they took the opportunity to completely redesign the interior with a more modern look that reflected the changing styles of the early 1970s. The new sets featured shag carpeting, harvest gold colors, and brown and baby blue accents that replaced the more traditional decor of the original house, giving longtime viewers a noticeable visual change that marked a new era for the show. Fact 11. The cast wore their own clothes. Unlike most television productions where costume departments provide elaborate wardrobes for the actors, Bewitched operated on a much tighter budget that required several cast members to supply their own personal clothing for their characters to wear on screen. This unusual arrangement meant that Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha, and Casey Rogers, who played Louise Tate, would bring their own dresses, shoes, and accessories from their personal closets to the studio each week for filming. The process worked like a well-organized laundry service, with the actresses delivering their personal wardrobes to the studio about a week before they were scheduled to film their scenes. The costume department would then take responsibility for cleaning, pressing, and maintaining these clothes so they would look perfect under the bright studio lights and be ready for the demanding schedule of television production. This budget-saving approach actually created some interesting benefits that the show's creators hadn't originally planned for, because it allowed the characters to showcase a little bit of the actors' real personalities through their clothing choices. When viewers saw Samantha wearing a particular dress or Louise appearing in a stylish outfit, they were actually getting a glimpse into the personal fashion sense and taste of the actresses themselves, which added an authentic touch to their performances. Casey Rogers later described the weekly routine of bringing her clothes to the studio, explaining how she would carefully select outfits that she thought would work well for Louise Tate's character, while also fitting the practical requirements of television filming. The costume department became experts at handling these personal garments, making sure they were returned to the actresses in perfect condition after filming was completed, since the clothes would eventually go back into their personal wardrobes for everyday wear once the television episodes were finished. Fact 12. Tabitha's name was misspelled for years. One of the most enduring mistakes in television history happened when Samantha and Darren's magical daughter was introduced to the show, and it all started with a simple spelling error that somehow made it past multiple levels of production oversight and remained uncorrected for years. The character was originally supposed to be named Tabitha, which was the actual name of one of actor Edward Andrews' daughters, and Elizabeth Montgomery had specifically chosen this name because she thought it had the perfect old-fashioned charm for a little witch. Montgomery had gotten the name directly from Edward Andrews himself, who had 2 daughters named Tabitha and Abigail, and she felt that Tabitha sounded exactly right for her character's child. However, when the first episode featuring the baby was produced and the opening credits were created, someone in the production department accidentally spelled the name as Tabatha instead of Tabatha, adding an extra letter A where it didn't belong. This spelling mistake should have been caught and corrected immediately, but somehow it slipped through the entire review process and appeared on television screens across America when the episode first aired. What made the situation even more frustrating was that once the episode had been broadcast and the credits were printed with the wrong spelling, it became incredibly expensive and complicated to go back and fix the error, especially since this was long before the days of digital editing when changes could be made easily. Elizabeth Montgomery was reportedly quite annoyed by this spelling mistake and would often mention her frustration in interviews, describing how seeing the wrong spelling in the credits was like hearing fingernails scratching on a chalkboard every time she watched the show. The misspelling persisted for several years before it was finally corrected, but by that time many viewers had become accustomed to seeing Tabitha with an A and didn't realize it had been wrong all along. Fact 13. Dr. Bombay actually got burned by pyrotechnics. Bernard Fox, the British actor who played the bumbling witch doctor, Dr. Bombay throughout the series, experienced real physical danger every time his character made one of those dramatic, magical entrances that delighted television audiences. Fox later revealed that he regularly suffered minor surface burns from the pyrotechnics and special effects equipment that were used to create the illusion of Dr. Bombay suddenly appearing in a puff of smoke whenever Samantha called for his help with a magical emergency. Dr. Bombay was one of the most popular recurring characters on Bewitched. Known for his pompous personality, his often ineffective magical remedies, and his tendency to arrive at the most inconvenient moments with great theatrical flair. His signature entrance involved appearing suddenly in the middle of a room surrounded by smoke and sparkles, which looked effortless and magical on television, but required dangerous pyrotechnic devices that created real fire and intense heat right next to the actor. The special effects technology of the 1960s was much more primitive and hazardous than the computer-generated effects that would be used in later decades. So creating magical appearances and disappearances relied on actual explosive charges, flash powder, and other combustible materials that posed genuine risks to anyone standing nearby. Fox had to position himself extremely close to these pyrotechnic devices in order for the camera angles to work properly, which meant he was regularly exposed to the heat, sparks, and flames that were generated during filming. Despite the physical discomfort and potential danger involved in playing Dr. Bombay, Fox continued to return to the show throughout its 8-year run because he enjoyed the character and appreciated the steady work that the recurring role provided. He understood that these minor burns were simply an occupational hazard of creating television magic in an era when safety protocols were less strict and special effects required actors to take more personal risks for their craft. Fact 14. The cast seemed cursed with early deaths. Starting in the 1990s, fans and entertainment journalists began noticing a disturbing pattern among the Bewitched cast members that seemed too strange to be mere coincidence, as one after another of the show's beloved actors passed away at ages that appeared to be well before their time. This observation led to widespread speculation about a supernatural curse affecting everyone who had been involved with the witch-themed sitcom, with some people suggesting that the show's magical subject matter had somehow attracted real supernatural forces. The rumors of a bewitched curse gained serious momentum after Elizabeth Montgomery died in 1995 at the age of 62, followed by the realization that Dick York and Dick Sargent had both died just a few years earlier in 1992 and 1994, respectively. As fans began looking more closely at the entire cast, they discovered that many other major characters had also died at what seemed like unusually young ages, including Alice Pierce, who played Gladys Kravitz, and died at 48, Paul Lynde, who played Uncle Arthur and died at 55, and Marion Lorne, who played Aunt Clara and died at 82. However, when researchers actually analyzed the death ages of all 20 major cast members against the average life expectancy in the United States, which is approximately 77.8 years, they found that the supposed curse was much less dramatic than the rumors suggested. The statistical breakdown showed that 9 cast members died before reaching the average life expectancy, while 9 others lived past that age, and 2 were still alive, which is essentially exactly what would be expected from any random group of people. The deaths that seemed most suspicious to fans were actually caused by very common medical conditions like cancer, heart attacks, and strokes rather than anything mysterious or supernatural, suggesting that the Bewitched curse was more likely a case of pattern-seeking behavior than actual supernatural intervention. Fact 15. Many episodes were exact remakes of earlier ones. When Dick Sargent took over the role of Darren Stevens from Dick York in 1969, the show's writers made a decision that seemed practical at the time, but would later embarrass them when fans began studying the series more closely decades later. Instead of creating entirely new storylines for the new Darren, the production team chose to remake many episodes that had originally starred Dick York, sometimes copying the plots so exactly that they used identical dialogue word for word in the new versions. This recycling of old scripts happened much more frequently than most viewers realized at the time, because the episodes were spread out over different seasons, and the producers assumed that audiences wouldn't notice the similarities or remember specific details from shows that had aired years earlier. The writers would take a popular episode from the Dick York era and essentially create a carbon copy with Dick Sargent, changing only the details that were absolutely necessary to accommodate the new actor's different personality and acting style. Some of these remakes were so obvious that even casual viewers began to notice the patterns, especially when the same magical mishaps, family conflicts, and workplace problems kept repeating themselves with slightly different variations. The plots would follow the exact same structure, with Samantha facing identical dilemmas, Endora causing the same types of trouble, and Darren reacting to magical situations in ways that mirrored his predecessor's responses almost perfectly. The reason the producers felt comfortable with this approach was that they never imagined Bewitched would still be popular enough for people to write books about it, analyze episodes in detail, or compare different seasons so carefully 50 years later. They assumed the show would have a normal television lifespan and then disappear into obscurity, so they thought no one would ever notice that they had essentially recycled their own material to fill out the later seasons of the series.